The ambient lighting inside Bella Vita was designed to make everyone look like a movie star, casting a warm, golden glow over the mahogany tables and crystal wine glasses. It was the kind of restaurant where the menus didn't have prices and the waiters moved with the silent grace of ghosts. For a mid-level data analyst making $50,000 a year, booking a table here was a reckless financial stretch. But Arthur Pendelton wasn't a mid-level data analyst. Sitting at a corner booth, Arthur adjusted the collar of his stiff, off-the-rack gray suit. It was a cheap polyester blend that breathed poorly, entirely unsuited for the mild summer evening, but it served its purpose. It was part of the uniform. For the past 2 years, Arthur had worn the disguise of an ordinary, struggling millennial with meticulous dedication. He drove a battered 2012 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper. He rented a cramped, walk-up apartment in a noisy neighborhood. He budgeted for groceries and complained about the price of gas. His right hand slid into his jacket pocket, his fingers tracing the sharp edges of the small velvet box hidden inside. Inside that box sat a flawless, 4-carat emerald-cut diamond ring, flanked by tapered baguettes, set in platinum. It was a Pendelton family heirloom, last worn by his late grandmother. Its value was roughly equivalent to the GDP of a small island nation. Tonight, the masquerade was supposed to end. Arthur took a slow sip of his sparkling water, his eyes fixed on the entrance. He loved Chloe. Or, at least, he loved the woman she had been when they first met in a crowded coffee shop during a sudden downpour. Back then, she was a junior marketing coordinator, laughing at his lame jokes, perfectly happy splitting a cheap pizza and watching movies on his tiny television. But Arthur was the sole heir to Pendelton Holdings, a gargantuan, shadowy private equity conglomerate that owned everything from commercial shipping lines to luxury hotel chains across 3 continents. His father had drilled one lesson into him since childhood: people will love your money, Arthur. They will love the power it brings. Finding someone who loves you when you have nothing is the only way to know it's real. So, the test had begun. And for a long time, Chloe had passed. But in the last 6 months, ever since her promotion to senior manager at Apex Innovations, something had shifted. The sweet, ambitious girl had become sharp, critical, and perpetually dissatisfied. She complained about his car. She rolled her eyes at his apartment. She constantly compared him to the executives at her firm. Arthur had rationalized it as work stress, hoping that tonight, when he finally pulled back the curtain and gave her the world she so desperately craved, the old Chloe would return. "Sorry I'm late," a sharp voice broke through his thoughts. Arthur looked up. Chloe stood by the table, looking breathtaking and entirely out of place next to his cheap suit. She wore a sleek, crimson designer dress that clung perfectly to her figure, her dark hair blown out into glossy waves. A pair of red-soled Louboutins clicked softly against the hardwood floor. "You look beautiful," Arthur said, standing up to pull out her chair. Chloe barely acknowledged the compliment, slipping into the seat and immediately placing her phone face up on the table. Traffic was a nightmare. And honestly, Arthur, you couldn't have picked a place closer to downtown? I had to pay $30 for an Uber because I refused to let you pick me up in that rattling death trap of yours in this dress. Arthur swallowed the sting, forcing a smile as he sat back down. I wanted tonight to be special. It's our 2-year anniversary, Chloe. I saved up for this. She picked up the menu, scanning it with a practiced, critical eye. Well, I hope you saved enough. I've had a brutal week and I need a decent glass of wine. Not the house red, Arthur. Something that doesn't taste like vinegar. Order whatever you want, he said softly. His thumb pressed against the velvet box in his pocket. Just hold on, he told himself. Once she says yes, I'll tell her everything. I'll buy her the winery. The waiter arrived, and Chloe ordered a bottle of vintage Barolo without looking at the price, followed by the truffle risotto. Arthur ordered a simple steak. When the waiter retreated, an uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Arthur looked at the woman across from him. She was aggressively checking her emails, her thumbs flying across the screen, her brow furrowed in concentration. "How was work?" Arthur asked, trying to bridge the growing chasm between them. "Hectic," she sighed, not looking up. "Apex is going through some massive restructuring. There are rumors of a buyout, but the C-suite is keeping it totally under wraps. It's a bloodbath of anxiety, but it's also an opportunity. If I play my cards right, I could make director by the end of the year." "That's amazing, Chloe. You've worked so hard for it." She finally put the phone down, looking at him. But her eyes weren't warm, they were assessing, calculating, and ultimately, disappointed. She took in his cheap suit, his scuffed dress shoes, his earnest, hopeful expression. "Arthur," she started, her tone shifting from dismissive to something heavier. It was a tone she usually reserved for terminating underperforming interns. "We need to talk." Arthur's heart did a strange, uncomfortable stutter. His fingers tightened around the box. "Okay. Talk." Chloe took a deep breath, avoiding his gaze for a fraction of a second before locking eyes with him again. Her expression hardened. "I'm not going to drag this out. It's over, Arthur. I'm ending this." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The ambient chatter of the restaurant seemed to fade into a dull, rushing sound in Arthur's ears. He stared at her, genuinely blindsided. He had expected her to be irritable, maybe even pick a fight about his clothes, but not this. "Over?" Arthur echoed, his voice alarmingly steady despite the sudden free fall in his chest. "Chloe, it's our anniversary. I brought you here tonight because you wanted to pretend we're something we're not," she interrupted, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Look around, Arthur. You don't belong here. We don't belong here. You saved up for months just to buy one dinner, and tomorrow you'll be back to eating ramen in that depressing shoebox you call an apartment." Things can change," Arthur said, desperation leaking into his voice. He almost pulled the ring out right then. He almost shouted the truth. "I'm a billionaire. I own half the skyline. But you won't change." Chloe snapped, leaning forward. "That's the point, Arthur. You have no drive. No ambition. You're perfectly content being a nameless drone crunching numbers for a mediocre salary. I'm 27. I am building a career. I want to travel, I want to live in a house with a security gate, I want a partner who elevates me, not someone I have to drag up the ladder with me." Arthur slowly pulled his hand out of his pocket, leaving the box behind. The metallic taste of betrayal washed over his tongue. The test. The ultimate, devastating test. She was failing it in spectacular fashion. "Is that all I am to you?" he asked quietly. "A dead end." Chloe sighed, running a manicured hand through her hair. The irritation gave way to a cold, brutal pity. "You're a nice guy, Arthur. Really, you are. But nice doesn't pay for the life I want. I've outgrown you. I need a man, not a project." She paused, taking a sip of the expensive wine the waiter had silently poured moments before. "And if I'm being entirely honest," she added, twisting the knife with surgical precision, "there's someone else." Arthur felt his jaw clench. "Who?" "His name is Richard," Chloe said, a faint, smug smile touching her lips despite the situation. "He's a vice president at Apex. He's ambitious. He's successful. He drives a Porsche, Arthur. When we go out, he doesn't have to calculate the tip in his head to make sure his card won't decline. He can give me the life I actually deserve." Arthur sat in silence. The urge to reveal his identity, to watch her face crumble in realization, flared hot and bright in his chest. He could destroy her new reality with one phone call. He could buy Richard's Porsche dealership and burn it down. But as he looked at Chloe, really looked at the greedy, superficial woman sitting across from him, the anger evaporated, replaced by an icy, absolute clarity. She didn't love him. She never had. She loved the idea of success, and she had used him as a placeholder until something shinier came along. His father had been right all along. Arthur didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a sleek, black American Express Centurion card, the one card he never used in his normal life, and placed it on the table. Chloe stared at the heavy, matte black titanium card. Her brow furrowed in confusion. "What is that?" "A fake metal card you bought online." "It's for the bill," Arthur said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. He stood up, buttoning his cheap jacket. His posture changed. The slight, submissive slouch of Arthur the data analyst vanished, replaced by the commanding, broad-shouldered stance of Arthur Pendelton, the heir. "You're just going to leave?" Chloe scoffed, though she looked slightly unsettled by his sudden shift in demeanor. "No crying. No begging. You made yourself perfectly clear, Chloe. Enjoy the Barolo. And good luck with Richard." Without looking back, Arthur walked out of the restaurant. The warm summer air hit his face as he stepped onto the pavement. He took a deep breath, letting the 2-year facade peel away from his skin. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the velvet box, and stared at it for a long moment under the glow of the street lamps. Then, he slipped it back inside. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. It rang exactly once. "Mr. Pendelton," a crisp, British voice answered. "James," Arthur said, walking past his dented Honda Civic without a second glance. "Send the car. I'm done downtown." "Right away, sir." "And how was your evening?" Arthur's eyes turned cold, staring up at the towering glass skyscrapers of the financial district. One of them housed Apex Innovations. "Enlightening," Arthur replied. "Also, call the acquisition team. I want the Apex buyout finalized by midnight tonight. Tell the current board I'll be in their offices at 9 a.m. sharp tomorrow to take personal control of the company." "Understood, sir." "Shall I prepare the executive restructuring files?" "Yes," Arthur said, a predatory smile touching his lips. "Pay special attention to the marketing department. I have a feeling they are in dire need of a reality check." Arthur hung up the phone as a sleek, jet-black Maybach glided seamlessly to the curb, its tinted windows hiding the wealth inside. The chauffeur leaped out to open the door. Arthur stepped into the plush leather interior, leaving his cheap life and his cheap ex-girlfriend behind on the sidewalk. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day at the office. The morning sun hit the gleaming glass facade of the Apex Innovations Tower, casting sharp, blinding reflections across the downtown financial district. For Chloe, the light felt like a personal spotlight. She strutted through the revolving doors of the grand lobby with the posture of a conquering queen. She felt lighter today. A 2-year wait had been severed the night before over a glass of vintage Barolo. As she tapped her keycard at the security turnstile, Chloe couldn't help but replay the breakup in her mind. Arthur's pathetic, shell-shocked face. His desperate attempt to save face by throwing down a ridiculously fake metal credit card. Honestly, did he order that off the internet just to look cool? It was pitiful. But she was free now. Free from the dented Honda Civic, the cramped apartment smelling of cheap takeout, and the suffocating lack of ambition that had defined Arthur's existence. "Morning, Chloe," the front desk receptionist chirped, looking slightly frazzled. "Morning, Jessica," Chloe replied, not breaking her stride. She stepped onto the executive elevator, pressing the button for the 45th floor. As the door slid shut, she checked her reflection in the polished brass paneling. She wore a tailored ivory blazer over a silk emerald blouse, her makeup flawless. She looked exactly like what she was about to become, the partner of a vice president, and soon, a director in her own right. The elevator pinged, opening to the chaotic, open-plan floor of the marketing department. Instantly, Chloe sensed something was wrong. Usually, the 45th floor hummed with the steady, quiet rhythm of keyboards and low-stakes murmurs over coffee. Today, it felt like the deck of a sinking ship. Phones were ringing off the hook, junior coordinators were practically sprinting between cubicles, and a distinct, palpable aura of panic hung in the air. "What is going on?" Chloe demanded, grabbing the arm of a passing intern who looked like he was on the verge of tears. "Check your email." The intern squeaked, pulling away and darting toward the copy room. Frowning, Chloe walked swiftly to her glass-walled office. Before she could even sit down, her door swung open. Richard stepped in, closing the door firmly behind him and pulling the blinds. Richard was everything Arthur wasn't. He was 32, wore his hair slicked back with expensive pomade, and was currently sporting a navy blue suit that cost more than a month of Arthur's salary. The heavy gold face of his Rolex caught the fluorescent light. But today, Richard's normally arrogant, smug demeanor was completely shattered. He was sweating. "Richard? What's happening?" Chloe asked, a sliver of unease finally piercing her triumphant mood. "We been bought," Richard said, his voice a harsh whisper. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, ruining it. "Overnight. A complete, unmitigated hostile takeover. The board didn't even have time to call a vote. The majority shares were just snapped up through a dozen shell companies before dawn." Chloe blinked, processing the information. Acquisitions happened, but rarely with this kind of violent speed. "Bought by who?" "Pendelton Holdings," Richard said, the name dropping like a lead weight in the room. Chloe's breath hitched. Even she, firmly entrenched in the marketing side of the corporate world, knew that name. Pendelton Holdings wasn't just a company, it was an empire. An aggressive, multi-billion-dollar private equity firm known for buying underperforming companies, ruthlessly stripping them of dead weight, and turning massive profits. They were the apex predators of the financial world. Pendelton. Chloe breathed, her initial shock quickly warping into a brilliant, opportunistic thrill. "Richard, this is massive. This is our chance. If Pendelton is injecting capital, they're going to want aggressive new leadership. If we pitch my Q3 strategy to the new transition team." "You don't get it, Chloe," Richard snapped, pacing the length of her small office. "This isn't a standard transition. CEO Marcus just got off a call with their legal team. They aren't sending a transition team. The owner is coming. Personally. Today." Chloe's eyes widened. The elusive head of Pendelton Holdings was notoriously private, a phantom billionaire who operated from the shadows of boardrooms in London, Dubai, and New York. The fact that he was descending upon a mid-level marketing firm in person was unheard of. "He's expected in 20 minutes, Richard continued, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. "Marcus has called a mandatory all-hands executive meeting in the main boardroom. Anyone rank senior manager and above. If we don't impress this guy today, we might be out on the street by noon. Pendelton is famous for firing half the C-suite on day one." Chloe stood up, smoothing her skirt, her ambition overriding her nerves. This was it. The universe was rewarding her for dropping the dead weight in her life. She was unencumbered, dressed for success, and ready to dazzle a billionaire. "Calm down, Richard," she said smoothly, stepping close to him and resting a hand on his chest. "We are the top talent in this building. We walk in there, we show confidence, and we align ourselves with the new power. This isn't a crisis. It's a ladder." Richard took a deep breath, nodding slowly. "Right. Right. You're right. Let's go." The grand boardroom. The 50th floor boardroom was a cavernous space of glass and mahogany, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. Normally, it was a place of relaxed power plays and catered lunches. Today, it felt like an execution chamber. 50 of Apex Innovation's top executives and senior managers stood around the perimeter of the massive, 60-foot conference table. Nobody dared to sit. The air conditioning was cranked high, but several vice presidents were visibly sweating through their silk shirts. Chloe stood near the head of the table, purposely positioning herself next to Richard and Marcus, the now powerless former CEO. She stood tall, chin up, projecting an aura of indispensable competence. She checked her reflection in the dark glass of the window, ensuring her smile was perfect, professional, yet inviting. If I can just get 5 minutes of face time with Mr. Pendelton, she thought feverishly, I can secure the director role today. At exactly 9 a.m., the heavy oak double doors at the end of the room clicked open. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Even the breathing seemed to stop. First came the vanguard, 4 imposing men in dark, identical suits, moving with the precision of Secret Service agents. They flanked the entrance, their eyes scanning the room with chilling indifference. Next came an older, distinguished-looking British man holding a leather folio. James, the chief of staff. Then, the air in the room seemed to shift, growing infinitely heavier, as the new owner of the company stepped over the threshold. Chloe had arranged her face into her most winning, ambitious smile, ready to lock eyes with the legendary titan of industry. Her smile froze. Her heart did not just skip a beat, it violently slammed against her ribs and seemed to stop altogether. The blood drained from her face so fast she felt physically dizzy, the room tilting dangerously on its axis. Walking toward the head of the table was a man possessing an aura of absolute, terrifying authority. He was dressed in a bespoke, midnight blue Tom Ford suit that draped perfectly over his broad shoulders. A crisp white shirt, a subtle silk tie, and the unmistakable, glittering heavy face of a platinum Audemars Piguet watch on his left wrist. His hair, usually a messy mop, was expertly styled. His jaw was set in stone. It was Arthur. Her Arthur. The man she had dumped 14 hours ago for being poor, pathetic, and a dead end. No, Chloe breathed, the word barely a microscopic squeak escaping her paralyzed throat. It's a mistake. It has to be a mistake. Is he an assistant? Did he get a job here? But the way the room reacted to him instantly shattered her desperate denial. Marcus, the former CEO, practically scrambled forward, bowing his head in total submission. The elite security detail deferred to him. The British chief of staff pulled out the high-backed leather chair at the absolute head of the table, the throne. Arthur did not sit immediately. He stood at the head of the table, his hands resting lightly on the mahogany surface, his dark eyes slowly panning across the terrified executives. Richard, utterly oblivious to the nuclear bomb detonating inside Chloe's brain, stepped forward with a booming, obsequious laugh. Mr. Pendelton. Welcome, welcome to Apex. Richard announced, thrusting his hand forward. Richard Sterling, Vice President of Marketing. It is an absolute honor, sir. We are thrilled to have your vision guiding us. Chloe wanted to scream. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her into the earth's mantle. She watched, paralyzed, as Arthur slowly turned his gaze to Richard. Arthur looked at Richard's extended hand for a long, agonizing 5 seconds. The silence stretched until it became physically painful. Finally, Arthur looked up at Richard's face. There was no anger in Arthur's eyes, no petty triumph. There was only a cold, unfathomable emptiness that was infinitely worse. Mr. Sterling, Arthur said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that commanded the acoustics of the entire room. He did not take the hand. I prefer to reserve handshakes for employees whose quarterly projections don't resemble a work of fiction. Take a step back. Richard's face flushed a violent shade of crimson. He awkwardly retracted his hand, stumbling backward into the line of executives, utterly humiliated in front of his peers. Arthur's gaze finally moved. It drifted past Marcus, past the trembling HR director, and locked dead onto Chloe. For a single, suspended moment in time, the rest of the room vanished. It was just the two of them. Chloe looked into the eyes of the man she had belittled, mocked, and discarded for a cheap imitation of wealth. She expected to see a smirk. She expected to see the vindictive glee of a man enacting his revenge. Instead, Arthur looked at her the exact same way he had looked at the cheap, wilted centerpiece on the table at Bella Vita last night. He looked at her like she was nothing. Like she was a minor, unpleasant detail he was about to correct. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur addressed the room, though his eyes never left Chloe's pale, trembling face. "My name is Arthur Pendelton. As of 3 a.m. this morning, I own 92% of this company. I have spent the last 3 hours reviewing your internal communications, your performance metrics, and your corporate culture." He slowly unbuttoned his suit jacket and took his seat at the head of the table. The British assistant immediately placed a thick, ominous black binder in front of him. "I am entirely unimpressed," Arthur continued, his voice echoing off the glass walls. He opened the binder. "Apex Innovations is bloated. It is arrogant. It values appearance over substance, and flash over loyalty. That ends today. Over the next 48 hours, this company will be purged of its dead weight." Arthur flipped a page, tracing a line with a gold Mont Blanc pen. He finally broke eye contact with Chloe, looking down at the dossier. "Let's begin with the marketing department," Arthur said softly, a razor-sharp edge to his words. "I understand there are some individuals here who are highly concerned with elevating their lifestyle. Let's see if their work ethic matches their ambition." Chloe's knees buckled slightly. She grabbed the edge of the mahogany table to keep from collapsing. The trap had snapped shut, and she was locked inside with the apex predator. The corporate guillotine did not fall with a loud, theatrical crash. Instead, it descended over Apex Innovations with the quiet, terrifying hum of a perfectly oiled machine. Within 48 hours of Arthur Pendleton's arrival, the entire landscape of the company had been scorched and reshaped. The 50th floor executive suite, once a haven of long, catered lunches and relaxed afternoons, was transformed into a war room. Arthur's transition team, a cotter of sharp-eyed, ruthless auditors in immaculate suits, swarmed the building, dissecting every financial record, every expense report, and every vanity project. For Chloe, the first 2 weeks were a waking nightmare. She spent her days trapped in a state of hypervigilance, jumping every time her desk phone rang, terrified it was HR calling to terminate her. She watched, paralyzed, as 3 vice presidents and half the board of directors were unceremoniously escorted out of the building by security, carrying their belongings in cardboard boxes. The old Apex culture of kissing up and failing upward was dead. In its place was a meritocracy so brutal it left the remaining staff breathless. But the most agonizing part of it all was the silence. Since the devastating boardroom reveal, Arthur had not spoken a single word to her. He didn't fire her. He didn't mock her. He simply treated her exactly as she had demanded to be treated at Bella Vita, as a stranger. He walked past her in the glass hallways without his gaze lingering for even a fraction of a second. To Arthur Pendleton, she was no longer a betrayer, she was a ghost. And then came the Friday of the Q3 marketing review. The dismantling of a vice president. The presentation was held in the smaller, glass-walled conference room on the 45th floor. Arthur sat at the head of the table, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp and calculating. Beside him sat James, silently taking notes on an iPad. Richard, sweating profusely despite the heavy air conditioning, stood at the front of the room with a laser pointer. Chloe sat halfway down the table, her stomach churning with a toxic cocktail of anxiety and impending doom. Since the takeover, Richard's arrogant veneer had entirely cracked. He was sleeping poorly, snapping at subordinates, and drinking too much espresso. The shiny Porsche he had boasted about suddenly seemed like a ridiculous financial anchor now that his exorbitant corporate expense account had been frozen by Arthur's auditors. "And so," Richard stammered, his voice lacking its usual booming confidence, "our primary Q3 initiative focuses on synergizing our brand footprint. We want to amplify the emotional resonance of the Apex brand through high-impact influencer networking and, dynamic paradigm shifts in our ad spend." He clicked to the final slide, which was essentially a collage of buzzwords over a stock photo of a sunset. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room. All eyes turned to Arthur. Arthur did not immediately speak. He calmly steepled his fingers, staring at the screen for a long, agonizing minute. When he finally looked at Richard, his expression was one of mild, clinical curiosity, like a scientist observing a particularly slow-witted insect. "Synergizing our brand footprint," Arthur repeated, his deep voice carrying no inflection. "Mr. Sterling, you have spoken for 25 minutes. In that time, you have used the word synergy 14 times, dynamic 9 times, and paradigm 6 times. Richard forced a weak, panicked chuckle. "Well, sir, in modern marketing, Mr. Sterling, we use numbers," Arthur cut him off, his voice dropping in temperature. "I did not hear a single metric regarding customer acquisition cost. I heard nothing about projected ROI. You are proposing a $4 million ad spend based on emotional resonance. Do you know what emotional resonance means to my accounting department? Sir, the qualitative data is entirely absent," Arthur finished smoothly. He picked up a printed copy of Richard's proposal and dropped it into the small wastebasket beside his chair. The thud sounded like a gavel falling. "You are a vice president, Mr. Sterling. You are paid a highly inflated salary to generate revenue, not to string together meaningless corporate jargon. Your department's conversion rate has dropped 12% over the last 3 quarters under your direct supervision, yet your personal expense account has increased by 40%. Arthur stood up, buttoning his jacket. The room held its collective breath. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties as Vice President of Marketing," Arthur announced. His tone wasn't angry, it was strictly business. "You will be demoted to Junior Account Manager. Your salary will be adjusted to reflect the market rate for that position, and you will report directly to the Senior Data Analyst. If you find these terms unacceptable, HR has your severance package prepared. James will show you the door." Richard stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled onto dry land. The humiliation was absolute. The man who had mocked Arthur's cheap suit was now publicly stripped of everything that made him feel superior. Chloe stared down at her hands, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had left Arthur for this man. She had thrown away a billionaire, a man of profound, hidden substance, for a flashy, incompetent fraud whose entire identity was built on credit cards and stolen ideas. The realization tasted like ash in her mouth. Arthur's gaze swept the table, briefly landing on Chloe. "I expect a revised, data-driven Q3 proposal on my desk by Monday morning from the remaining senior staff." Meeting adjourned. The penthouse confrontation. By 7 p.m. that evening, the office was mostly empty. Chloe sat at her desk, staring blindly at a spreadsheet. The walls were closing in on her. Richard had packed up his office in a humiliated rage 2 hours earlier, muttering about unfair treatment before storming out. She had ignored him. She was entirely done with Richard. She needed to fix this. She needed to fix herself. Taking a deep breath, Chloe stood up. She walked to the executive washroom, reapplied her lipstick, and sprayed a tiny amount of vanilla perfume on her wrists, the exact perfume she had worn on her first date with Arthur. She smoothed down her tailored skirt and headed for the private elevator that led to the penthouse suite. The top floor was an absolute fortress of silence and luxury. The thick, plush carpet absorbed the sound of her heels. She bypassed the empty receptionist desk and approached the massive, double oak doors of the CEO's office. Taking a steadying breath, she knocked twice and pushed the door open. The office was staggering. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, glittering view of the city at twilight. The furniture was sleek, dark, and impossibly expensive. Behind a massive slate desk sat Arthur, illuminated by the glow of his monitors, reviewing digital contracts. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal his muscular forearms, looking infinitely more powerful and magnetic than the man she thought she knew. He didn't look up as she entered. "I told security I wasn't to be disturbed, James." "It's not James," Chloe said, her voice trembling just enough to sound vulnerable. Arthur finally stopped typing. He raised his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The silence stretched, heavy and unyielding. He didn't tell her to leave, but he didn't invite her to sit, either. "Ms. Davis," Arthur said, perfectly formal. "To what do I owe this breach of protocol?" Chloe stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She forced tears to well up in her eyes, a trick she had mastered years ago to get out of speeding tickets. "Arthur, please. We need to talk. Not as CEO and employee. As us." "There is no us, Ms. Davis. That entity was dissolved over a plate of truffle risotto 2 weeks ago." "I was stupid," Chloe cried, taking another step toward his desk, letting the first tear spill over her lashes. "I was so stressed, Arthur. The pressure here, the culture, it got to my head. I didn't mean any of the things I said at the restaurant. I was just projecting my own insecurities onto you. I made a terrible, terrible mistake." Arthur leaned back in his leather chair, his face an impenetrable mask. "You made a very clear choice. You chose a Porsche over a Honda. You chose a Rolex over a Timex. You chose Richard over me. It was a highly logical, if shallow, decision based on the data you had at the time. I was confused," she pleaded, resting her hands on the edge of his massive desk, trying to bridge the physical and emotional gap between them. "I love you, Arthur. I always have. When I saw you walk into that boardroom, it wasn't the money that shocked me. It was realizing how much I missed you. How much I threw away. Please, give me a chance to prove it. Let's start over." Arthur stared at her. For a fleeting second, Chloe thought she saw a flicker of the old, warm Arthur in his eyes. She leaned in closer, banking on the vanilla perfume to trigger his memories. Instead, Arthur reached into the top drawer of his desk. He pulled out a small, familiar object and set it gently on the slate surface between them. It was the black velvet box. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes widened, completely mesmerized by the box. Arthur reached out and flipped the lid open. The heavy, 4-carat emerald-cut diamond caught the ambient light of the city, throwing brilliant flashes of fire across the dim office. It was the most magnificent, breathtaking piece of jewelry Chloe had ever seen in her life. It was a ring fit for royalty. "Do you know what this is?" Arthur asked softly. "Arthur," she whispered, reaching a trembling hand toward it. Before her fingers could brush the velvet, Arthur snapped the box shut with a sharp, final click. He pulled it back, out of her reach. "It's a family heirloom," Arthur stated, his voice devoid of any romantic warmth. "Worth roughly $3 million. It belonged to my grandmother. The night you broke my heart, it was sitting in my left pocket." Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. She swayed on her feet, the physical weight of her regret suddenly crushing her chest. She had been minutes away from having everything she ever wanted. She had thrown away a diamond empire because she couldn't wait through one more cheap dinner. I didn't know," she choked out, "actual, genuine tears of devastation finally spilling down her cheeks. "That was the entire point," Arthur said, his tone turning to ice. "My father warned me about women like you, Chloe. Women who look at men as financial stepping stones rather than partners. I spent 2 years wearing polyester suits and driving a broken car to find out if your heart was real. And the moment a shiny, incompetent fool dangled a promotion and a sports car in front of you, you showed me exactly who you are. People change, Arthur. I've learned my lesson. I see you now." "You see my bank account," Arthur corrected her, standing up. He towered over her, casting a long shadow across the desk. "You don't want me, Chloe. You want the penthouse. You want the private jets. You want the power. You are mourning the loss of a billionaire, not the loss of Arthur." He picked up a thick file folder from his desk and tossed it casually toward her. It slid across the slate, stopping just inches from her hands. "Now," Arthur said, his voice instantly reverting to the sharp, clinical tone of a CEO. "Since you are here, let's discuss your value to this company. I spent the afternoon reviewing your Q1 and Q2 marketing campaigns." Chloe blinked, violently yanked from the emotional wreckage of the moment back into the terrifying reality of her professional life. My campaigns. They are derivative, uninspired, and highly dependent on inflated budgets to mask a severe lack of creative substance," Arthur stated flatly. "You hide behind Richard's buzzwords to justify poor conversion rates. You are exactly the kind of dead weight I am purging from Apex." "Arthur, please, you can't fire me." "I am not firing you, Ms. Davis," Arthur interrupted. "Firing you would allow you to collect a generous severance package, which you do not deserve. No, you will remain here. But your title of senior manager is suspended pending a thorough 6-month performance review. You will be reporting directly to the new director of marketing, who I will be appointing on Monday. You will work the long hours. You will meet the new metrics. Or you will resign of your own accord." Chloe stood frozen, completely hollowed out. He had dismantled her entirely personally, emotionally, and professionally. There was no warmth left in him. The Arthur she knew was dead, replaced by a titan who viewed her only as a failing asset on a spreadsheet. "Are we clear, employee 402? Arthur asked, his eyes burning with cold authority. Chloe swallowed hard, her throat burning. She slowly pulled her hands off his desk, the lingering scent of vanilla perfume mocking her failure. She had tried to play a game with a master, and she had lost absolutely everything. "Yes, Mr. Pendelton," she whispered, her voice broken. "We are clear." She turned and walked out of the massive double doors, the silence of the penthouse pressing down on her like a tomb. Behind her, Arthur Pendelton sat back down in his chair, opened a new digital file, and went back to work without a second glance. The weekend provided no refuge for Chloe. It was a 48-hour purgatory of pacing her expensive, leased apartment, staring at her phone, and waiting for an email that would either finalize her termination or confirm her worst fears. When Monday morning finally broke, the sky over the city was a bruised, heavy gray, perfectly matching the atmosphere inside the Apex Innovations building. Chloe stepped off the elevator onto the 45th floor. The chaotic, frantic energy of the previous week had vanished, replaced by a tense, hyper-focused silence. The marketing department looked different. The lavish espresso machines had been removed, replaced by standard commercial drip brewers. The plush, distracting lounge areas where executives used to gossip away the afternoons had been cleared out to make room for more functional workspace. Arthur Pendelton was optimizing the floor space, and the message was clear: you are here to work. Taking a deep breath, Chloe walked toward her glass-walled corner office. Or, rather, the office that used to be hers. Standing in the doorway was a young man from the facilities department, holding a clipboard. Inside, her personal belongings: a framed degree, a designer pen set, and expensive ergonomic lumbar pillow were already packed into 2 standard-issue cardboard boxes. "Ms. Davis?" the facilities worker asked, glancing at his clipboard. "I was instructed to facilitate your relocation this morning. Your new workstation is cubicle 4B, in the central bullpen." Chloe's jaw tightened. The central bullpen was where the junior coordinators and fresh out of college interns sat. It was loud, exposed, and entirely devoid of prestige. It was the exact place she had fought tooth and nail to escape 5 years ago. "Relocation," Chloe managed to say, her voice tight. "I haven't received official word from the new director yet. Mr. Pendelton's office issued the floor plan restructuring at 6:00 a.m., the worker replied with a sympathetic but firm shrug. "I'm just following orders, ma'am. I can carry these to your desk if you'd like." "I've got it," Chloe snapped, her pride flaring up for a brief, useless moment. She hoisted the heavier box into her arms and turned around. The entire floor seemed to be watching her. The analysts she used to boss around, the coordinators whose names she never bothered to learn, they were all staring at the former senior manager carrying her own cardboard box of shame into the trenches. She kept her chin high, her Louboutins clicking sharply against the tile, but her face burned with humiliation. Cubicle 4B was cramped. The desk was a fake laminate wood, the chair squeaked ominously, and the partition walls were a dull, soul-crushing beige. She dropped her box onto the desk with a heavy thud, the sound echoing her plummeting career. "Morning, Chloe." Chloe whipped around. Standing at the entrance to her cubicle was Maya Lin. Maya was a quiet, fiercely intelligent woman who had been a data analytics coordinator for the past 3 years. She wore thick-rimmed glasses, dressed in sensible, unassuming clothes, and usually hid behind dual monitors. Chloe had routinely dumped her most tedious, complex campaign data onto Maya at 4:55 p.m. on Fridays, demanding reports by Monday morning while Chloe spent the weekends at rooftop bars. Today, Maya was wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit. She carried a sleek tablet and possessed a newfound aura of calm, unshakable authority. "Maya," Chloe said, forcing a tight, plastic smile. "Nice suit." "Thank you," Maya said smoothly. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply looked at Chloe with the cool, professional detachment of a superior. "I assume you received the company-wide memo this morning? Mr. Pendelton appointed me as the new director of marketing." The floor seemed to drop out from under Chloe's feet. Maya. The quiet, invisible data cruncher. Arthur hadn't just bypassed Chloe, he had elevated the exact person Chloe had stepped on to climb the ladder. It was a surgical, masterful stroke of corporate restructuring. Arthur was rewarding actual competence and dismantling the culture of vanity. "Congratulations," Chloe choked out, the word tasting like poison. "Thank you, Chloe," Maya replied, her tone strictly business. "As you know, Mr. Pendelton has placed your senior manager title under suspension. For the next 6 months, you will be operating as a level 2 marketing analyst. Your salary has been adjusted accordingly by HR." Chloe gripped the edge of the cheap laminate desk until her knuckles turned white. A level 2 analyst. It was a demotion that set her back half a decade. She was making a fraction of her previous salary. The lease on her luxury apartment, the designer clothes, the expensive dinners, it was all going to come crashing down. "What are my new responsibilities, Director?" Chloe asked, swallowing her massive, suffocating pride. She had to survive. If she quit, she got nothing. Arthur had ensured that. Maya tapped her tablet, bringing up a dense, intimidating spreadsheet. "I've forwarded a batch of historical data to your terminal. I need a comprehensive, line-by-line audit of the last 3 years of our influencer outreach spending versus actual conversion rates. Mr. Pendelton believes there is a 20% inefficiency margin hidden in the raw numbers. I need you to find it, cross-reference it with the new Q4 projections, and map out a revised acquisition cost model. Chloe stared at her in horror. It was pure, unadulterated grunt work. The kind of mind-numbing, eye-straining analytical heavy lifting she had always paid juniors to do. It would take weeks of 12-hour days just to compile the data, let alone analyze it. That's an enormous amount of raw data, Maya, Chloe protested weakly. It is, Maya agreed, her expression completely neutral. I used to do it for you every weekend. I expect the preliminary findings on my desk by Thursday at 8 a.m. Let me know if you need assistance configuring the new analytical software. Welcome to the new Apex, Chloe. With that, Maya turned and walked away, heading toward the corner office that Chloe had just vacated. Chloe sank into her squeaky, uncomfortable chair. She turned on her monitor, watching the Apex Innovations logo load. The reality of her situation settled over her like a heavy, suffocating blanket. She was trapped in a prison of her own making, built by the man she had thrown away. The ghosts of hubris. By Wednesday afternoon, Chloe was a wreck. Her eyes were bloodshot from staring at microscopic spreadsheet cells for 10 hours a day. Her pristine manicures were chipped from nervously picking at them. She had skipped lunch 2 days in a row, terrified of falling behind on Maya's brutal deadlines. She stood up to grab a cup of the terrible break room coffee, needing a jolt of caffeine to survive the afternoon. As she pushed open the door to the break room, she stopped dead in her tracks. Standing by the microwave, waiting for a frozen meal to heat up, was Richard. He looked entirely unrecognizable from the arrogant, flashy vice president of last week. His custom suit had been replaced by a wrinkled, off-the-rack button-down. His perfectly styled hair was a mess. He looked aged, exhausted, and deeply bitter. As a junior account manager, he was currently reporting to a 24-year-old team lead who was making his life miserable. Richard looked up and saw her. A sneer twisted his face. "Well, if it isn't the fallen queen," Richard muttered, pulling his sad, plastic-wrapped meal from the microwave. "Enjoying the view from the cubicles." "Don't start with me, Richard," Chloe snapped, pouring the black sludge into her mug. "I don't have the energy." "Oh, poor Chloe," he mocked, leaning against the counter. "You played the game and lost." "We both did. That psychopath Pendelton completely ruined me. My Porsche's getting repossessed on Friday because I can't make the payments on a junior manager's salary. I had to freeze my country club membership." "Nobody cares about your car, Richard," Chloe fired back, her own stress boiling over. "You're the one who promised me a promotion. You're the one who strutted around like you owned the place, selling me on a future that didn't exist." "Me? You used me," Richard snarled, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You attached yourself to me because you thought I was a golden ticket. You're a leech, Chloe. The second Pendelton walked into that boardroom, I saw the way you looked at him. If he had offered you a life raft, you would have drowned me yourself to get on it." Chloe opened her mouth to argue, but the words died in her throat. Because he was right. They were two sides of the same counterfeit coin. They had both worshipped the illusion of wealth, and now they were both drowning in the harsh reality of their own incompetence. "We're both getting exactly what we deserve," Chloe said quietly, staring into her black coffee. She didn't feel angry at Richard anymore, she just felt an overwhelming, crushing exhaustion. She turned and walked out of the break room, leaving Richard alone with his frozen food and his ruined ego. The view from the top. Thursday morning arrived with a cruel, mocking brightness. Chloe had stayed at the office until 11 p.m. the night before, finally compiling the preliminary data Maya had requested. She printed the thick report, bound it in a neat folder, and walked it over to Maya's office. Maya reviewed it quickly, her sharp eyes scanning the numbers. "The data is solid," Maya conceded, setting the folder down. However, Mr. Pendelton requested that this specific report be delivered directly to his executive assistant, James, on the 50th floor. He is integrating our influencer metrics with a broader international acquisition strategy today. Chloe felt a cold spike of dread in her chest. You want me to take this up to the penthouse? You compiled the data. If James has immediate questions, you are the most equipped to answer them, Maya said logically. Take it up now, please. Chloe took the elevator up to the 50th floor, her stomach doing somersaults. Since the devastating confrontation in Arthur's office, she had avoided the executive level entirely. She prayed she would only see James, drop the file, and flee. The elevator doors chimed and slid open. The penthouse level was exactly as she remembered, silent, pristine, and intimidating. She walked softly down the wide, carpeted hallway toward the main reception desk. As she approached, she heard voices drifting from the open double doors of the Grand Executive Lounge. She froze, instinctively stepping behind a large, decorative pillar. She peeked around the marble column. Inside the lounge, bathed in the natural light of the floor-to-ceiling windows, stood Arthur. He was dressed flawlessly in a charcoal suit, looking relaxed and powerful. But he wasn't alone. Standing next to him was a woman. She wasn't dressed in the stiff, hyper-tailored corporate armor that Chloe favored. She wore a simple, elegant emerald green sundress, her dark hair falling naturally over her shoulders. She was holding a tablet, pointing something out to Arthur, and laughing. It was a genuine, musical laugh. And then, Chloe saw it. Arthur looked down at the woman, and a smile broke across his face. It wasn't the cold, calculating smirk of the CEO. It wasn't the polite, guarded smile he gave his executives. It was the warm, radiant, boyish smile that he used to give Chloe. It was the smile of a man who was genuinely happy, completely at ease, and profoundly connected to the person standing next to him. Elena, the logistics on that supply chain are a nightmare, and you know it, Arthur teased, his deep voice carrying a warmth Chloe hadn't heard in what felt like a lifetime. It's only a nightmare if you're afraid of a little hard work, Mr. Pendelton, the woman, Elena, fired back with a playful smirk. My firm can optimize it in 3 weeks. You just have to trust me. I trust you, Arthur said softly, his eyes lingering on her face. That's exactly why I hired your consulting firm. Chloe pressed her back against the cold marble pillar, squeezing her eyes shut as a single, hot tear escaped and tracked down her cheek. It was the final, devastating blow. Arthur wasn't just surviving without her, he was thriving. He had completely excised her from his emotional reality. He had moved on. He was finding joy, connection, and respect with a woman who looked at him as a partner, not an ATM. A woman who challenged him intellectually, who laughed with him, and who, undoubtedly, had no idea about his wealth when they first crossed paths in the professional world. She had thought her punishment was the demotion, the cubicle, and the endless spreadsheets. But as she stood hidden in the shadows of the penthouse, listening to the man she loved laugh with someone else, Chloe realized the true nature of Arthur Pendelton's payback. He didn't need to destroy her. He simply let her destroy herself, and then he left her behind to watch him conquer the world. Chloe wiped her face, took a shaky breath, and stepped out from behind the pillar. She walked straight to James's desk, handed the British assistant the folder without a word, and walked back to the elevator. When she returned to cubicle 4B, she sat down in her squeaky chair, pulled up the next massive spreadsheet, and began to type. There were no shortcuts anymore. There was only the work, the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights, and the heavy, immovable weight of absolute regret. The grand atrium of the Waldorf Astoria was a masterclass in opulent design, a sprawling ballroom of gilded arches, cascading crystal chandeliers, and polished marble floors that reflected the ambient, golden light like a mirror. It was the venue chosen for the annual Winter Gala of Pendelton Holdings' newly integrated subsidiaries, an event designed to celebrate the end of a ruthless, highly profitable year. For the executives of the newly restructured Apex Innovations, it was a night of triumph and survival. For Chloe Davis, Level 2 marketing analyst, it was an endurance test in sheer, unadulterated humiliation. 6 months had passed since Arthur Pendleton had walked into the boardroom and dismantled her life. 6 months of grinding, agonizing work in the beige purgatory of Cubicle 4B. Her transition from the top of the social hierarchy to the absolute bottom had been swift and merciless. Tonight, she stood near the towering ice sculpture at the back of the ballroom, trying to remain as invisible as possible. She was wearing a black silk dress she had bought 3 years ago, a beautiful piece, but one she had already been photographed in multiple times. Before Arthur, she would have maxed out a credit card to buy a new, striking gown from Bergdorf Goodman to ensure she was the center of attention. Now, her credit cards were cancelled, her luxury apartment was replaced by a modest studio in Queens, and every spare dollar went toward paying off the immense debt she had accrued living a lifestyle she could never actually afford. She took a sip of her sparkling water. She couldn't even stomach the thought of the expensive champagne circulating on silver trays. The bubbles tasted like ash. From her vantage point in the shadows, she could observe the entire ecosystem of the new corporate reality. The hierarchy was vividly clear. Near the front of the ballroom, cordoned off by invisible lines of power and influence, were the VIP tables. Maya Lin, the newly minted director of marketing, stood at the center of a group of international investors. Maya looked radiant in a tailored, minimalist white evening gown, speaking fluent Mandarin to a venture capitalist from Shanghai. Maya had earned every ounce of her success, dragging the marketing department out of its superficial slump and into an era of unprecedented, data-driven profitability. Chloe watched her former subordinate command the room, a bitter pill of genuine respect finally dissolving in her throat. Maya was everything Chloe had pretended to be. "Look at them," a slurred, bitter voice muttered over Chloe's shoulder. Chloe didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Richard Sterling leaned heavily against the ice sculpture, a highball glass of scotch loosely gripped in his hand. He looked terrible. The 6 months of demotion had aged him a decade. He was wearing a rented tuxedo that didn't quite fit across the shoulders, and his eyes were bloodshot with a mixture of alcohol and chronic defeat. "Don't do this tonight, Richard," Chloe said quietly, keeping her eyes fixed on the crowd. "Just keep your head down." "Keep my head down." Richard laughed, a harsh, grating sound that drew a few irritated glances from a nearby table of junior accountants. "I used to run this floor. I used to sign the checks for half the people in this room. Now I'm taking orders from a 23-year-old kid who still lives with his mother. Pendleton destroyed us." "We destroyed ourselves, Richard," Chloe corrected him, her voice entirely devoid of the fiery ambition that used to define her. "He just turned on the lights so everyone could see the mess." Richard sneered, taking another heavy gulp of his scotch. "You've gone soft, Chloe. You let him break you. If I can just get 5 minutes with one of the board members tonight, I can pitch my new." "Mr. Sterling." The voice was quiet, polite, and entirely immovable. 2 large men in immaculate dark suits had materialized from the crowd, flanking Richard with terrifying synchronization. It was Arthur's private security detail. "Sir, you have exceeded your allotted drink limit for the evening," the taller of the 2 men said, his tone perfectly even. "Mr. Pendleton's office has requested that we arrange a car to take you home. Please come with us." "I'm not going anywhere," Richard hissed, his face flushing with drunken indignation. He tried to step away, but a large, heavy hand clamped down on his shoulder with the force of an industrial vice. "It wasn't a request, Mr. Sterling. The car is waiting." Chloe watched in silent, morbid fascination as the man she had once deemed the epitome of success was quietly, efficiently, and entirely erased from the room. Richard offered no further resistance, the fight completely draining out of him as he was escorted out the service doors, a pathetic ghost vanishing into the cold winter night. A sudden shift in the ambient noise of the ballroom pulled Chloe's attention back to the main entrance. The gentle hum of string quartets and polite conversation dropped to a hushed, reverent murmur. The center of gravity in the room had just fundamentally altered. Arthur Pendelton had arrived. He walked through the grand gilded doors, and for a moment, the breath was completely knocked out of Chloe's lungs. He was devastatingly handsome, exuding a quiet, absolute power that required no flashy accessories to announce itself. He wore a bespoke, midnight blue tuxedo with a classic black bow tie. He moved with the grace of a man who owned not just the building, but the very ground it stood upon. But it wasn't Arthur's wealth or power that twisted the knife deep into Chloe's chest. It was the woman walking beside him. Elena. She looked ethereal. She wasn't dripping in diamonds or wearing a dress designed to scream for attention. She wore a sweeping, midnight blue gown that perfectly complemented Arthur's attire, her dark hair pinned up in an elegant, effortless cascade. Her hand was tucked securely into the crook of Arthur's arm. They were leaning into each other, Arthur whispering something into her ear that made Elena throw her head back in a bright, genuine, musical laugh. Arthur looked at Elena with a warmth and adoration that was so profound, so entirely complete, that Chloe felt physically ill. That was the look Arthur used to give her, across the sticky table of a cheap diner, over a plate of shared fries. That was the love she had held in her hands and discarded because it hadn't come wrapped in platinum. Arthur and Elena moved through the crowd, parting the sea of executives like royalty. Arthur greeted Maya with a warm, respectful handshake, introducing Elena to her. They looked like a team. A genuine partnership built on mutual respect and shared intelligence. Chloe shrank further into the shadows, a suffocating wave of panic washing over her. She couldn't be here. She couldn't watch this. It was a masochistic exercise in torturing her own soul. She turned sharply, abandoning her water glass on a passing waiter's tray, and hurried toward the heavy glass doors that led to the outdoor terrace. She needed air. She needed to escape the blinding, radiant glow of the life she had thrown away. The winter air hit her like a physical blow, freezing the tears that had instantly sprung to her eyes. The terrace was empty, overlooking the glittering skyline of the city. She hurried to the stone balustrade, gripping the cold marble with trembling hands, and finally let out the sob she had been choking down for 6 months. It wasn't about the money anymore. The realization had dawned on her slowly, painfully, during the long, quiet nights in her new, cramped apartment. The money was just a symptom of her own rot. She cried because she had been a hollow, superficial person. She cried because Arthur had been a genuinely good, kind, and loving man, and she had treated his heart like a disposable commodity. She had broken the best thing that had ever happened to her, and the universe had ensured she would have to live with the exact, calculated measure of her mistake. "It's a bit cold to be out here without a coat." The voice was a low, resonant baritone. It sent a shockwave of electricity straight down Chloe's spine. She gasped, spinning around. Arthur stood a few feet away, the heavy glass door of the terrace slowly clicking shut behind him. He wasn't looking at her, he was looking out at the city skyline, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his tuxedo trousers. The dim, ambient light of the city cast sharp shadows across his jawline. Chloe hastily wiped the tears from her cheeks, panic seizing her throat. "Mr. Pendelton. I'm sorry. I was just getting some air. I'll go back inside." "Stay, Ms. Davis. The ballroom is stifling," Arthur said quietly. He finally turned his head to look at her. There was no anger in his eyes. There was no petty triumph, no gloating, no vindictive pleasure at seeing her shivering and crying in a 3-year-old dress. His expression was one of profound, clinical calm. He looked at her the way one might look at an old photograph of a place they had visited a long time ago with distant recognition, but zero emotional attachment. "I saw Richard being escorted out," Arthur noted, his tone conversational. "He has struggled to adapt to the new metrics of reality." "He's lost everything," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. "We both have." Arthur slowly shook his head. "You didn't lose everything, Chloe. You simply lost the illusion. What you have now, your position, your salary, your apartment, is the exact, mathematical sum of your actual value to this company and this world. You are finally living within your true means. Emotionally and financially." The truth of his words hit her like a physical weight, dropping her shoulders. She couldn't argue. She couldn't manipulate him. All her old weapons, the fake tears, the perfume, the practiced vulnerability, were utterly useless against him. "I know," Chloe said, her voice cracking. "I know what I am, Arthur. And I know what I did. I spend every single day staring at those spreadsheets, thinking about that night at the restaurant. Thinking about what I threw away because I was too blind and too greedy to see the man sitting right in front of me." She looked up at him, her eyes pleading for a single ounce of forgiveness. "I am so sorry, Arthur. Not because you're a billionaire. But because you were good to me. And I broke your heart." Arthur held her gaze for a long time. The wind howled softly around the stone columns of the terrace. "You didn't break my heart, Chloe," Arthur said softly, definitively. "You cured it?" Chloe flinched, the words striking deeper than any insult ever could. "My father told me that wealth is a magnifying glass," Arthur continued, turning his gaze back to the glittering city below. "It doesn't change people. It simply magnifies who they already are. When I hid my wealth, you magnified your ambition, your dissatisfaction, and your cruelty. When I revealed it, you magnified your greed and your desperation. You showed me exactly who you are, and for that, I will always be profoundly grateful." He pulled his right hand out of his pocket and checked his watch. "You were a necessary lesson, Chloe. A stepping stone to ensure I recognized the real thing when I finally found it." As if summoned by the very thought of her, the heavy glass doors opened again. Elena stepped out onto the terrace, wrapping a luxurious silver shawl around her shoulders against the chill. "Arthur, darling, Maya is asking for you," Elena said gently, her voice warm and melodic. She stepped up beside him, naturally slipping her arm around his waist. "I'll be right there," Arthur smiled, leaning down to press a soft kiss to her temple. As Elena reached up to adjust the lapel of Arthur's tuxedo, her left hand caught the ambient light from the ballroom inside. Chloe stopped breathing. Sitting perfectly on Elena's left ring finger was a massive, flawless, 4-carat emerald-cut diamond, flanked by tapered baguettes, set in platinum. It was the ring from the velvet box. The $3 million family heirloom. The ring that had been sitting in Arthur's pocket at the restaurant, waiting for Chloe to say the right words. Now, it belonged to a woman who wore it not as a trophy of conquest, but as a symbol of an equal, unshakable partnership. Elena noticed Chloe standing in the shadows. She offered a polite, somewhat confused smile. "Oh, I'm sorry. Am I interrupting a business discussion?" "No," Arthur said smoothly, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. "Ms. Davis and I were just concluding our business. We are entirely finished here." Arthur looked at Chloe one last time. It was the look of a door closing forever, the final, resounding click of a lock tumbling into place. "Have a good evening, Ms. Davis. And good luck with your Q1 analytics. I expect great things from your department under Maya's leadership." "Good evening, Mr. Pendelton," Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Arthur and Elena turned and walked back inside the warm, golden glow of the ballroom. The glass door clicked shut, sealing them inside a world of light, laughter, and genuine love. Chloe was left alone on the dark terrace. She looked down at her hands, trembling in the freezing air. She was 27 years old. She was a level 2 analyst with a mountain of debt, a cramped apartment, and a hollow, aching void in her chest where her future used to be. She walked over to the edge of the balcony, looking down at the street 50 stories below. The city looked like a scattering of diamonds across black velvet. She reached into her small, cheap clutch purse and pulled out the only thing she had kept from that night at Bella Vita. It was a small, promotional business card for a luxury car dealership Richard had given her, back when she believed in his illusions. A symbol of everything she had chased. With a slow, deliberate movement, Chloe opened her fingers and let the card go. She watched it flutter into the darkness, spiraling down, 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 until it was completely swallowed by the shadows, gone forever. She pulled her thin silk dress tighter around her shoulders, turned her back on the glittering party inside, and began the long, quiet walk to the subway. She had a lot of work to do on Monday.